So I'm Vikki Coombes, and I am one of the admins for We Are Phenomenal Women. And we started off by inviting a whole lot of people that we've met over the last few years who we consider to be phenomenal women. And Sondra is one of them. And so she has the dubious privilege of being the very first person that I'm having one of these conversations with. And what we want to do with a phenomenal woman discusses is just explore things that we are passionate about, that we think that you as phenomenal woman will also find really interesting. You may find it inspiring, you may find it challenging, and we'd love to have you ask us questions, put comments of your own experiences where things resonate for you into the comments, and we will respond to them. Possibly not live because this is still a learning curve, particularly for both of us. But we will definitely come back, and we would love for this to be the conversation that Sondra and I have now to be an opportunity for you guys to bounce off and open the discussion wider across the group. So welcome, Sondra. Can you just start off by telling us a little bit about you and introducing yourself to the group?
Okay, I'm Sondra Turnbull. I'm the director of Goddess Kindled Universe, which is a publishing company and a community, birthing community. I write magical realism. I teach meditation. I've come from a holistic therapy and energy medicine background. I've been teaching Reiki and energy healing and meditation in different forms for over 20 years. And so that's my sort of big background.
Yeah. And the other thing I thought would be really useful at the start, because what we're looking to explore now is the kind of journey you've been on in the creating of a goddess Course in Miracles.
Yeah.
But that is coming out of a Course in Miracles, right? But I think there will be people here who don't actually know what that is. They may have heard it. And I know 2 years ago when it first got mentioned to me, I just thought, well, I want to be doing some stuff with these women. I had no idea what it was until I got into it, right?
Yeah,
so I think that would be helpful to just kind of say, this is what a Course in Miracles is before we explore where you've gone.
Okay, so a Course in Miracles is a body of work, is a body of text that was scribed by a woman in the 70s, I want to say. Okay. It wasn't really released. It was sort of big in the 90s, in the early 90s. Now, she wasn't a religious woman, but the entity that made itself known to her did so, like she interpreted it as Jesus or the Christ. So It's a Christ consciousness that's come through in this body of work. And so there's a lot of, that's basically what it is. But it's not a religious teaching, though it uses a lot of religious vocabulary. And it's all really patriarchal vocabulary too, which is how things were understood then. We're going through this huge evolution at the moment where language is changing and society is changing, and women are getting bigger and claiming more space. And so what was appropriate then may not be as appropriate now. Language is a live thing. It's a living thing.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what it is. Very basically, there's lots of information. There are lots of study groups around. It's not hard to find more information about it. It's not difficult.
Yeah. So what was it? Because I know when I first came across it, I think we were doing a year-long kind of thing, weren't we? Because my memory is the student part of it is there are 365 days. So each day you look at a different piece of writing, right? So what was it? And I know you went on that journey yourself, and you led groups that were studying it and things like that. So what was it that then flipped you or drove you to have this vision of creating a goddess Course in Miracles?
So I went into studying it. We're doing the workbook for students, which is the 365 days of lessons, one lesson per day. And as I was saying before, all of the language is really patriarchal. And that's not a bad, that's not, it's, I say patriarchal, but what I mean is masculine. It's all masculine pronouns and referring to God as he. Now, I've always had a problem with any text that has the word God in it, or I did for a really long time. And as we got further and further into the studies, I realized that every time these masculine pronouns or references came up in the text, I had this reaction. It was such a powerful reaction that I knew that there was something there that I needed to get down into. Now, not a surprise, really, huh? Really not a surprise. But because we were in these groups and really discussing and holding each other and letting each other get very vulnerable about things, I was able to go into why these things were triggering me so hugely. And, you know, I tapped into things like anger, which I've never been good at, ever, ever, ever. And, you know, old wounds around men in my life, around, men in my life.
Just generally.
Just generally.
Just put that in a box, yep.
But really specific, you know, patriarchal wounding. And with this sort of other layer of Abrahamic religious like squashing of the feminine, which also really infuriated me. And so we got to the point where one day I said, hey, you know, let's flip this one around in the feminine. Let's read this lesson in with the feminine. And it was a completely different lesson. It was a completely different feeling. It took us to different places. And I went, you know what, wouldn't this be amazing to do this whole thing in the feminine?
And is it just a case of having changed the pronouns? I don't think it is, from what you've told me. That
no, well, I sought because it's a really big project. It's a lot of text. And so I wanted to, if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it properly. So I approached the publishers and I got permission to create this audio course and content, because they will never change the pronouns to the feminine. And you know, that's just the direction from spirit that they have received, and that's fine. But and I can understand why, because it does give it a completely different context. And I can also understand why, because the aim of it is to kind of get into this state where the illusory world falls away, and the gendering of God is part of that illusory world. My problem is, I don't think, for me, I can't get to a genderless God until I see myself in God, which I can't do if I keep calling the dude he.
Yeah.
I just can't do it. And so I am very much like, I'm the most Libra you'll ever meet. And I'm all about balance. I'd love to get to that space of feeling the genderless God, but I don't. And so I need to get myself there. And I can't be the only woman who doesn't see herself in spiritual text.
Yeah.
And I don't see myself in spiritual text because I'm not represented there in the language. And so that's why I did it.
And it's been quite the journey. Like you've shared some of that. So you used words with me like I had to be my own therapist, teacher, priestess, bone woman.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this journey. Like what's happened with you? Because I know you're still creating. You haven't yet got to the point of it's done.
I am literally this morning got the last lesson into the framework. So now I can get down into the nitty-gritty teaching parts of it. But to get here, it's like layering on coats of paint. It was editing the text and then creating, you know, lessons from the text, creating journaling prompts, recording the audio. And so each time I go through it is another coat of paint, or maybe to be more precise, stripping away of old layers of paint, which was in turn infuriating and illuminating and everything in between, and overwhelming, and like, I know I just don't want to look at this anymore. It's just too much. But then coming back to it after a few days of going, what's wrong with me? And realizing I hadn't been inside the Goddess Course of Miracles, and like it kind of losing that perspective of the universality of everything. Rein me in, woman. I'm going to keep talking.
But that's one of the things, that many things I love about you, because what I'm hearing as you're speaking and is that almost a processing from source, right? Where you're going, blah, 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 here's what it is. Yeah. For me, the term bone woman is a new one.
Okay. There's a myth. It's a legend. Perhaps Mexican.
Okay.
But there's an old woman who walks the deserts collecting bones, and I'm going to please don't quote me on any of this. This is and she collects the bones of animals, and then she takes them back to her cave and she assembles skeletons. And then when she has a complete skeleton, she sits and she sings over the bones. And she sings life back into the bones. She sings muscle onto the bones. She sings skin onto the muscle. She sings fur onto the body. She sings breath into the animal. And then the animal leaps up and the wolf, runs away.
Okay.
And turns into, as the wolf is running away, it turns into a young woman running wild, free. So there's this, in the creation of this, there has been a stripping away. If I hadn't done it in the masculine first, it wouldn't have the same meaning to me as it does now, because I was able to get in and strip so much of that anger away, and then come into this perspective of the text and do a whole lot more stripping away of feminine wounding. And as I'm the act of changing the masculine to the feminine was itself this amazing journey. Sometimes I would have one lesson where by the end of it, I would gnashing my teeth and almost in tears at the number of incidental, little tiny incidental words through this text that I'd had to flip that completely changed it, but was completely acceptable the other way as something that covered everybody, every human.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a complete stripping away and then singing myself into this thing that I'm creating, and singing every other woman and person. Because if he can refer to every person on the planet, she and sister can too.
Yep. And you mentioned earlier the bit about balance, right? Like, because with your Libra.
Oh yeah, I was going somewhere there.
Yeah. There's something. And for me, when I think, I have no desire to get to a point of a genderless being.
Mm.
For me, there's that incorporation of total sacredness, which isn't necessarily about genderless, right? It's neither a male or a female or androgynous. It incorporates any expression of gender, or which is,
I guess that's what I mean by genderless.
Yeah, the incorporation.
I want to feel that, all that is, but I don't. And I want to know what that feels like. But to get to that, I've got to go through and claim me and see me. And then, that's kind of my next level thing,
Yeah.
This, who knows, maybe one day I'll do this whole thing in a genderless, all that is form, which will be its own thing as well. But I'm not ready for that yet.
Yeah. It's one of those things where your head goes, that would be interesting, but first let's do the work.
Well, that's always been in my head, because that's like the masterclass. But we can't, it's all well and good to say, yes, everything is incorporated in this energy. And it is. But we don't, it's jarring to hear it in the feminine. And if it's jarring to hear it in the feminine and it's not jarring to hear it in the masculine, that's a problem. And we need to address that first before we skip over the feminine once again and just go, oh, it's all included. Yeah, well, that's what you've been saying with all the masculine stuff. And now you're just going to skip over owning the feminine and go straight to this other thing. No, that's not how this works. That's not healing. That's more ignoring.
Yeah. Exactly. So there's something, so that's really interesting. And as I'm listening to that, so this for me is a metaphor for so many other things that we as women are doing, right? Like I'm talking with women from across the corporate world at the moment, and last night was also talking with people, with some of my phenomenal friends here who work in the public sector and charity sectors. And as I'm talking with them about some of their experiences, even now, and I'm like, there's so many underlying assumptions. Yeah. And yes, a lot of that comes down to language, but language it's how we express what's within us, right? Yes. So,
and that's a book I'm writing, because I've been so furious lately about how words that are indicate shame, excuse me, are built into so many of the words we use to describe feminine things or attributes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something else that needs to be addressed. And because language it's how we express ourselves. These are the tools, these words are the tools we use to express ourselves. And we need to find ourselves in the words. And the everyday use of very simple words that you don't even think twice about. There's a substrate through that feels like, don't challenge this. This is the way it is. Don't look closer.
Yeah.
And it's so subtle.
It is. And yet what I find when I, just for myself, right, let alone other people, when we challenge, like you're doing with this, A Goddess Course in Miracles, right? When we flip, you use the term flip, right? When we do that, suddenly the perspective, suddenly things open up. And one of my things that I have, just at the back of my head all the time, based on, I've worked across multiple industries. I've worked around the world. I've worked in all sorts of different types of organizations, et cetera, et cetera. And I find myself looking at them going, as you said earlier, we're in this amazing time of transformation across the planet. And the work you're doing is part of that. And I'm looking at it with my corporate perspective, going, there's something there for me about moving from this very hierarchical, rigid, structured, boxed, very clearly defined edges to something a bit more organic and cyclical and wavy and learning to be in a place where that not only are we okay with that is the normal, right?
Yep.
To get there requires that challenge of language, to challenge our own assumptions, to challenge our own beliefs, to challenge our shoulds, right? So yeah, I mean, I know for myself, like the more you talk about this, a course, the goddess Course of Miracles, the more I'm like, because that when I did it, I lasted probably about 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And then I just went,
Yeah.
And it wasn't until you started talking about what we were doing that I went, a lot of that, when I look back at the reactions I was having, how I was being triggered, I was getting pissed off. Right? Mm-hmm. A lot of that was to do with that masculine.
Yeah.
And also some of the other assumptions around what is God.
The religious.
Which is in and of itself a very patriarchal.
Absolutely.
Heritage.
It absolutely is. And I could have changed a lot more than I did, but I chose not to, because the words that were triggering, like things like savior and sin and, little tiny words like that are important to look at. They're important to sit with. This is a big shadow work. It's big shadow work. And part of the reason why I think this works is because it's not just you reading lessons and making yourself sit and read a lesson every day. It's practice, and it's talking every week with other people who are doing this practice of loosening all of these assumptions that we've had our entire lifetime and redefining the language that we use without thought every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm just going to close off. So I'm reading a series at the moment, which I reread. So I've got lots of series in the fictional world that I love revisiting, and it's like catching up with old friends again.
Yes, I love that.
And the series I'm reading at the moment is based in Ireland in about 700 AD, as there's massive shift going on in Ireland at the time where they're already Christian. So the Christian faith has already been brought in and is mostly accepted across the land. But what's happening is a lot of the Roman structures and beliefs and etc. are coming in, and there's lots of debate going on. And the series is actually a crime series, but a lot of this comes up in it because it's set in this context, this culture, this,
And it's overarching.
Yeah. What I find both innovating and tragic in this series is because it does talk a lot about how the culture as it is in Ireland, how it has over thousands of years been created, and there's a lot of equality and respect for both genders, and they are very clearly defined who you are within society, what your honor is, what your honor price and stuff is. And what I find tragic is I look at that, how it was, and I look at where that is now. And one of my ancestral heritages is Irish, and I just cry. I cry, right? Because I'm like, look at where you were 1,500 years ago and where you are now. For me, the exciting thing about this, like you're saying about the language and challenging that, and some of these words that we've all grown up with in our own different contexts, is working through that wound, right? Which is centuries and centuries and centuries worth of wounding, back to that, the healing and drawing the learning we can from way back then to who we are now and who we want to become, right?
And you don't even have to go that far back. Just use your lifetime now, darlings.
Oh, I know.
Look in this lifetime now, and don't run away. Like, don't run away because it's scary. But to do that, you need support.
Yeah.
So groups like this is where you find that support.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're ready with when you're ready to go, it's here. I'd absolutely invite people in the group to sign themselves up, right, and to be part of that journey of practicing together through this and having the conversations. I mean, my memory, it is 2 years ago now, but my memory of some of the conversations I had, even though I was pissed off, was just, like you said, so shifting.
And because we were pissed off,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like the conversations with that bunch of women are some of the most profound and shattering and loving interactions I've ever had.
Yeah. Yeah. So good luck with the next pieces.
Yeah.
I know that, I mean, I'm excited about where you're going with this, and know that, you know, it's a journey I'm ready to be part of. So thank you.
Stripping away and rebuilding yourself and singing to your bones, darlings.
And
form that takes. Just do it.
Yeah, just do it with your Nike sneakers on. So thank you so much, Sondra, and let's see what discussion we generate, right? And
yeah, please do jump in, everyone.
Yeah, looking forward to people's questions, challenges.
Yes.
I'd be really curious to know of any other women in the group who have done the 8 Course of Miracles and where they're at with it.
Yep.
All right, that would be cool.
That would be great.
Thank you.